My name's Anne Jackson and I'm an artist who works in textile media. I'm going to tell you something about my current body of work, the Witchcraft Series. I make knotted tapestries responding to some of the ideas and issues that surround the history of witch prosecution and persecution, particularly in Great Britain and Europe. My background is that I was born in the US, but I've lived in the United Kingdom ever since I went to university in Scotland many years ago. I did a medieval history degree at St Andrews University, but changed direction once I'd finished in favor of making a career as a textile artist. I set up a studio and gallery in St Andrews after graduating, and a few years later went as a postgraduate to Art College at Middlesex University in London. The Witchcraft Series is my current long-term project. It's proving to be a deep and rich field of inquiry, and so far there's no end in sight. The main works in the series at the moment are on the scale you can see here. In recent years, I've been putting together and beginning to tour a solo exhibition entitled Certain Witches, Fear, Myth and Magic. It was hung at the Devon Guild Jubilee Gallery in Bovey Tracy, Devon for the second time last year. My tapestries are shown here, along with plinths displaying objects and artifacts from the Museum of Witchcraft and Magic in Boscastle, Cornwall. I spend time in the gallery when my exhibition is on show, engaging with the public. I find that my ideas are fertilized by visitors' responses to the work, and they often relate stories of family folklore and personal experiences to me. These interactions have become part of the continuing energy of the project, as has giving talks and engaging in discussions online, as is happening here today. I feel that we are all able to add strands to an underlying story that runs through our culture. I'm beginning to see what I'm doing as giving voice to a collective concept. It touches on the histories of witchcraft and the roles of the ideas surrounding, the roles that the ideas surrounding it can play in our society. For me, it also has a strong personal subtext about the powers women hold or are allowed to hold through the histories of Western society. It seems like quite a potent channel. During its run at the Devon Guild last year, the exhibition attracted 15,000 visitors. I'm intrigued by the way threads of witch belief weave through contemporary Western culture. Not only is the witch an important figure in the current landscape of art, literature, and film, but she thrives in our daily language and in political discourse. When Margaret Thatcher died in 2013, the London band Fat White Family posed with a homemade banner reading, "Ding dong, the witch is dead." Nowadays, we all hear President Donald Trump revisiting the idea of the witch hunt on a daily basis. And the famous doctor who's been being quoted in the news in the recent days, whom he believed had the cure, I forgot what it's called now, but the cure for coronavirus, turns out to have lots of beliefs about witches and demons and how women can develop terrible problems through having sexual relations with demons in their sleep and all sorts of things. So that kind of figure is still very much around. Last year, somebody sent me this picture of an altar set up in New York City during demonstrations in protest against the confirmation of Judge Brett Kavanaugh to the US Supreme Court. That doesn't look like a good luck charm to me. On a more mundane level, shop fronts in my local town, Crediton, are decorated every Halloween with displays like this. It seems to me that, rather than being killed off by modern-day rational attitudes, ideas about witches have become more prominent in the time since I began making the Witchcraft series. Because my chosen textile medium is slow, I'm very conscious of the passage of time. A subject whose essence is history, storytelling, and mythology seems particularly appropriate. I've always been interested in witches. I grew up in suburban America, where Halloween is a major event. It's the one night of the year when ghosts and goblins prowl suburban streets in the dark, on the hunt for sweets by the bagful. It always felt thrilling, approaching houses that were changed from their daytime appearance, decorated with carved jack-o'-lanterns and images of black cats, witches, and skeletons. From the time we could first read or listen to stories, we were imbued with images of witches, from fairy tales and The Wizard of Oz to the classic Disney animated films. One of my first witchcraft tapestries touched on these memories. It's entitled "The Devon Witches Beat the Water, Tremble's Daughter." The Halloween witch of my childhood was an anarchic, playful figure, energetic and mischievous. There were few images of powerful women available in 1960s American suburbia. The world of my childhood was remarkably like the early series of the TV program Mad Men. I even recognized some of the kitchen fittings. The only obvious women of power in my life were teachers, housewives, and mothers. They seemed to have control over we children and not much else. Perhaps that was why I loved dressing up as a scary, powerful Halloween witch. As an adult, I still relate to that childish energy. The images I used for this tapestry were scanned from my own and friends' collections of toy witches. One or two of you might actually recognize one or two of these because I borrowed them many years ago to make this tapestry. The bordering text here is from a trial account of Mary Trembles, one of the Bideford witches who were executed at Heavytree, Exeter in 1682. A witness at their trial testified that he heard 3 women chanting, "Beat the water, Tremble's daughter, thrice the brindled cat hath mewed," as they stirred a cauldron. The first time I heard that real-life people had actually been accused of and punished for witchcraft came as part of lessons in American history and the Salem witch trials. Later on, we studied and performed Arthur Miller's play, The Crucible, at my school in the Chicago suburbs. In the play, as is well known, the trials represented the US government McCarthy anti-communist hearings of the 1950s. Most late 60s American teenagers were familiar with the play and were very often influenced by its message. We were the anti-Vietnam War generation, ready to support causes and to demonstrate against injustice and for peace and civil rights. When I arrived at St. Andrews University in 1973, I gravitated toward student politics, student journalism, and soon after toward the early women's liberation movement, which proved to be central to my life for a number of years. For a time, I even lived in a women's commune in the Fife countryside, where we did our best to practice self-sufficiency and ate, drank, and slept feminist theory and politics. This is me in my screen-printed women's liberation t-shirt, digging out the compost heap for our vegetable garden. During my time as an active feminist, the witch was, of course, an obvious reference point, though I think we tended to see her more as a symbol of rebellion and female empowerment than as a human being. A few years later, I remember being on an anti-nuclear demonstration in London with police on horseback and a chain of Greenham Common women dressed in archetypal pointed witch hats and costumes who were dancing in front of them. The encounter that eventually launched my exploration of historic witch trials many years later was with this memorial plaque in Exeter, the nearest city to where I live. I found it mounted on a wall in Rougemont Gardens beside the old law courts. It was amazing to discover that the site of the last executions of women for witchcraft in England was so near to my home. Given the hidden nature of so much of women's history, perhaps it wasn't so surprising. The innately fictional idea of the cartoon fairy tale horror film witch and the political woman of power became a human being to me. She was someone who was tried and executed for non-existent crimes in real life. I set about researching the history of this particular set of witch trials, a project which has led me further afield across England and finally into Europe. It turned out that my background in medieval history research finally came to fruition, and I discovered what an enormous and far-reaching subject I was approaching. These are the first 3 tapestries in the Witchcraft series. The triptych overall is entitled The Devon Witches, after the women commemorated on the monument. According to Silvia Federici in her book Caliban and the Witch, it was only in the wake of the feminist movement that the witch hunt emerged from the underground. Feminists were quick to recognize that thousands of women could not have been massacred and subjected to the cruelest tortures unless they posed a challenge to the power structure. 3 of the 4 women named on the plaque were hanged for witchcraft in 1685. All 4 are named on this tapestry, and part of the charge against Temperance Lloyd, their supposed leader, is shown at the bottom. Alice Molland is not named in the record of executions, so she may well have died in prison. Among the things I found out as I began my research was that in England, witches were hanged rather than burned at the stake. This was thought to indicate what a civilized country England was. The law distinguished the treatment of witches from that of heretics who were burned for their religious beliefs. Witchcraft was perceived largely as the criminal act of doing harm to others or their property. This tapestry is entitled Certain Witches, Chelmsford, Essex, 1566. As I began to widen my research in the stacks of the Exeter University Library, I discovered that the early production of printed books, with the invention of the printing press, was key to the spread of witch belief and witch trials across Europe and the American colonies. I saw this as a powerful parallel to our modern tabloid press and more recently social media. The small woodcuts used to illustrate the publications played a key part. In a largely illiterate culture, they made a powerful impression. Often the local priest was the only one in the village who could read. The pictures would offer a way to reinforce the fearful warnings and messages he was passing on. I was introduced to these images by a feminist academic at Exeter University named Marianne Hester. At the time, she was writing a book entitled Lewd Women and Wicked Witches. The pamphlet that described the trial of these certain witches in Chelmsford in 1566 included woodcuts that represented 3 women of the same family. Agnes Waterhouse, pictured here, her daughter Joan, and her grandmother Eve were all tried, though only Agnes was hanged. One aspect of what I'm trying to do is to name and commemorate these individual women who have largely been forgotten by history. Agnes Waterhouse, among many others, was unjustly executed for imaginary crimes. I try to create at least a few moments of acknowledgement for her and for them. The first book published in Europe, warning against the evils of witchcraft, was the Malleus Maleficarum of 1487. The authors were 2 German monks, Heinrich Kramer and Jakob Sprenger. To make this tapestry, I scanned an image of the book's original title page, which runs up the left side of the piece. The work is entitled Witch Hunt Maleficium in Memoriam. The images were taken from a later book published in 1607, entitled Compendium Maleficarum, which contains many illustrations like this. I blew up and printed just 4 of the least lurid ones. They depict aspects of continental witch belief at the time. The devil is shown consorting with a witch. 3 witches in the shape of animals ride off on a forked stick. A group of witches are shown shape-shifted into animal form, and 2 witches raise a storm, sacrificing a cockerel over a cauldron. Because the tapestry referenced continental witch trials, I employed images to evoke execution by burning. I collaged photographs from our village bonfire site as a background and added an image of a burnt wooden stake to complete the composition. By the time I made this piece, I had begun exhibiting in group textile art shows across Europe. The venues tended to be magnificent museum galleries where work on a larger scale was welcomed. I felt even more encouraged to expand my ambitions when this tapestry was bought by the Danish city of Aalborg Art Collection. I'll tell you briefly about how I make my work. As a result of my time at art college, I developed a technique I call knotted tapestry. It's a hybrid of Gobelin tapestry weaving and the kind of knotting used in macrame, which I had learned as an American teenager. I like it because it creates a strong fabric and allows a lot of flexibility in the shape of the resulting work, something which isn't easy to achieve by techniques that involve a loom or weaving frame. In knotted tapestry, both warp and weft can move freely in the weaving process. In effect, I create a warp, as in all weaving, but it's only fixed at one end. Each warp thread is made taut with one hand as the weft is looped over it with the other, making a knot called a double half hitch. It's easier to demonstrate than to explain. I work with pins on a board rather than on a loom or a frame. There are 2 short videos on my website that show the making process for anyone interested. I work on top of a cartoon, the traditional name for the tapestry design drawing. I usually make this by painting quite roughly on paper, then collaging drawn, photographed, and printed images onto the surface. This is the cartoon for my most recently finished piece before I made the tapestry on top of it. I've hung it on the wall so I can decide whether the design is complete and whether the composition will be balanced. I often use the same painted base of the cartoon over and over. Because my technique involves sticking hundreds of pins through the design as I knot over the top of it, Each iteration damages the surface extensively and creates further random, ragged edges. I refurbish the cartoon for reuse by repairing the surface, maybe repainting it, changing the edges if they don't satisfy me, and sometimes turning it over or sideways. Then I collage new images onto it and start again. To me, the reuse of the basic shape creates a rhythm and unity between the tapestries, because I conceive the Witchcraft series as one large overall work. And I like the found quality of reusing a pre-existing surface. I think it suits the arbitrariness of what we chance to discover about the past, and the way stories can be made worn and ragged by retelling and re-recording over the centuries. The shapes of the tapestries are often a bit off-kilter. This creates a sort of unease that I think suits the subject. I blend up to 8 strands of individual cotton, linen, and silk to make each length of weft yarn. You can't really see the cartoon I showed you in place under the growing body of this tapestry, but I'm constantly referring to it as I work. In a way, the imagery rises up through the warps from the cartoon below. For a long time, I responded directly to the colors painted onto the paper surface, but I've begun taking a more abstract approach recently, creating a background of blocks of subtle color variation, which relate to the story I'm trying to tell. The resulting effect is quite rich. I use a lot of text in my work. In the Witchcraft series, I reproduce original text from documents or early books whenever I can. The early typography fascinates me, adding a feeling of authenticity, maybe of a voice speaking. Recently I've realized that my affinity for early witchcraft woodcuts and trial pamphlets may right back to my time at St. Andrews when I was a student. On arrival, I became very involved in student journalism. I was the editor of the weekly student newspaper in my second year. As well as writing articles and doing layout, our small team traveled north of Dundee on the train at dawn every Tuesday morning to a freezing cold, noisy print workshop. It looked something like this. In fact, it looked exactly like this. These great clattering machines smelling of oil typeset our words. The blocks of type were then laid carefully into heavy frames with pictures on printing blocks inlaid alongside on the stone, as the table was called, which is shown here. The rough prints were proofread and corrected by us, standing around in the cold, before being printed on huge presses, a double page at a time. It was a very artisanal process, and not very far away from that invented by Gutenberg. These were the last days of industrial linotype printing, I'm pretty sure. The newspaper we eventually received to sell back in St. Andrews was also entirely in black and white, as newspapers still were in the mid-70s. Looking back, I think the physical conversion of thought into words and images in that artisanal way was a key experience for me, which has re-emerged in my current visual art practice. The early witch hunting manuals and pamphlets had an informative function, as well as spreading sensational stories. The wild images and dramatic ideas printed and widely distributed for the first time were intended to spread warning and fear about witches and their evil deeds throughout the Europe-wide populace. This has always seemed to me to have resonances with our modern tabloid press and nowadays social media. From Ulrich Molitor's De Lamiis et Parthenicis Mulieribus of 1489, here are 2 witches who have shape-shifted into animal form and are riding off with the devil on a cleft stick or stang, from my tapestry Witch Hunt Maleficium in Memoriam. An artist friend observed recently something I hadn't realized. She said that my work has always sought to speak directly to the viewer, as long as she has known it, and my current interest in public engagement is part of the same process. Looking back at previous bodies of work, I think I can see what she means. This piece from 1989 quotes the first response that viewers always seem to voice about textile artworks. I had a studio for a while that was open to the public, and it was often what was said to me. This one from 1992 summed up the then prevalent art world attitude, an opinion which still hasn't died out entirely. And this one is from a series I completed in 2004 entitled Old Masters. It quotes the then chair of the Institute of Contemporary Arts, writing about Tracy Emin, who was then at the height of her fame. I called this piece After Bosch. The cartoonish drawing I was using at the time may explain the affinity I feel with the witch pamphlet woodcut images I include frequently in the Witchcraft series. When I met academic and author Marianne Hester, she gave me some photocopies of woodcut images from early modern manuals on witch hunting. I'd never seen anything like them before. It was the late 80s, and I'm not sure they were as often seen as they are now. I mounted them in my sketchbook where they stayed for many years, while my ideas about the subject began to take shape. The little demon riding on the woman's cloak here has always been a favorite of mine, though it hasn't made its way into a tapestry just yet. I just love the anarchic energy of these images. Even when the message being conveyed is solemn and fearful, the little devils always seem to be capering around, as if the artist who created them is thumbing his or her nose at the establishment of the time. This tapestry is entitled Ursula Kemp, St. Osyth, Essex, 1582. I finished it in 2010. Ursula Kemp was tried and executed during a famous series of witch trials in the village of St. Osyth in Essex. The image is from a postcard published when the skeleton, which was thought to be her, was dug up during building work in the 1920s and became a tourist attraction. The text framing the tapestry is from the original pamphlet, which describes the trials and the confessions and executions of a number of witches, including Ursula Kemp. The piece depicts elements of two magic spells she was accused of using. One, whose words border the tapestry, supposedly healed a sick child, and the other was meant to cure rheumatism. As was common in English witch narratives, Ursula was said to keep familiar spirits in the shape of animals, and I adapted various woodcut images to depict them. The handprint in 3 of the corners is my own. It references the healing spell she cast for the child. I am, of course, aware of the underlying horror and grimness of my subject matter. My intention in these tapestries is to make something visually arresting or even beautiful, which also brings to consciousness something deeper and darker. The story of Ursula's skeleton sounds like a picaresque folktale. It's easy to forget the fact and injustice of the woman's death. Recent research, published since this tapestry was made, has established that the skeleton doesn't belong to Ursula Kemp. It may actually date back to the Roman occupation of Britain. Factual errors, misinterpretations, and out-of-date research have become part of the process of making these tapestries. They take a long time to complete and are only artifacts of what I know about at the time I made them. As I try earnestly to present a discourse, a story, or an argument, further research, information, or discussion shows that history has slipped through my fingers. It reminds me how little I really know about anything. And one little postscript, because we are based in Exeter for this talk, is that the skeleton ended up in the collection of Robert Lenkovich, the famous Plymouth painter, for quite a long time, and was kept in his library in a case lined with satin, apparently, which is yet another amazing thing to happen to a possible witch's skeleton, in my opinion. I've noticed recently that a lot of surviving evidence we have for English witch trials are records created at the behest of named individual gentlemen, either for official reasons or personal interest. The area around St. Osyth was subject to a major outbreak created by what was seen at the time as witches and their evil doings. The amount we know about it, apparently, is due to the assiduous interest of one man, a local magistrate named Brian Darcy. The St. Osyth trial documents preserve detailed, lurid, picturesque accusations of women and some men from numerous villages. They provide a very rich source for me. Ursula Kemp's trial alone has yielded 2 more works for me, a pair of smaller tapestries entitled The Child Witnesses. The first depicts the testimony of Ursula's 8-year-old son, Thomas Rabbit. He was encouraged to testify against his mother, which was an established practice derived from the writings of European demonologists. The framing text here is again from the original trial document. The boy describes and names his mother's familiar spirits. He's quoted as saying, "Titty is like a little gray cat, Tiffin is like a white lamb, Pegeen is black like a toad, and Jack is black like a cat." Ursula Kemp was hanged, at least in part, due to this statement. Reusing and reorienting the same cartoon, I made a companion piece. The testimony from the same set of St. Osyth trials is that of 8-year-old Phoebe Hunt, describing her stepmother's familiars. The text says, "She hath seen her mother to have 2 little things like horses, the one white, the other black." Her stepmother, Alice Hunt, was hanged as a result of her testimony. In both tapestries, I created my own childlike drawings of the witch's familiars. I'm quite pleased with the 2 little things like horses. I intended them to express a sort of innocence. The next large tapestry I made is The Great European Witch Hunt, the word witch in 10 languages. The framing text of this tapestry is made up of words for witch in the languages of 10 European regions and countries where witch hunting was prevalent between 1450 and 1750. The groups of images, mostly taken from woodcuts, depict 3 beliefs about witches that applied across the continent. These were that they could shapeshift into animal form, that they could fly, and that they practiced magic, often with written charms or herbs. I've been exhibiting my work frequently across Europe in the last 15 years. Traveling for meetings, conferences, and private views, I've gained a perspective on the consciousness of historic witch persecution and prosecution in different countries and the wide spread of the phenomenon. As well as trying to commemorate individual women, I explore ways in which the idea of the witch and the witch hunt operate as metaphors in our own culture. For this piece, entitled Alchemists, I referred to contemporary scientific research, particularly that of my husband, Nick Smirnoff, who is professor of plant biochemistry at Exeter University. I made it as part of my participation in a symposium at EGENIS, the Center for the Study of Life Sciences, here at Exeter. In 1998, Nick discovered the metabolic pathway by which plants make vitamin C. The knowledge could be used for genetic engineering. This was a significant scientific achievement, but it resulted in us being offered many opportunities to witness the fears our culture manifests about biotechnology, almost as if it was a modern form of witchcraft. So I made this. On the left side of this tapestry are my own redrawings of medieval alchemical symbols and of the personal symbol or sigil of Dr. John Dee, alchemist to Queen Elizabeth I. The roots of modern science lie in alchemy. Sir Isaac Newton and Robert Boyle, who founded modern chemistry, were both practicing alchemists. On the right side of my tapestry are chemical structures representing some of Nick's research interests at the time: a long-chain hydrocarbon used in biofuels, and a compound called anthocyanin, which is associated with vitamin C synthesis. At the bottom right is his own personal symbol, his university ID barcode. As I explore further into the history and ideas surrounding witchcraft, I often come across magic signs, charms, and symbols. In rural England, the tradition of the village cunning man or woman lasted into the 20th century, and in some ways has never died out. When people feared that some kind of witchcraft might have been used against them, or when their animals or children were sick, they could call on the village wise man or woman. For a fee, they could be supplied with a written or drawn charm or a spell to bring good luck, heal sickness, or ward off evil. Alongside Wicca, pagan witchcraft, and modern approaches to healing magic, in an informal way, this traditional kind of white witchcraft still seems to be around. A friend of mine in my rural village is the local white witch. She's a well-respected lady of the parish who operates as an informal therapist to the community, including regular churchgoers. She performs healing magic and does harvest rituals for a few local farmers. She occasionally tells fortunes and casts runes. She was my consultant on this, the third of my original Devon Witches tapestries. It's entitled Half-Hidden Signs, a phrase quoted from Diane Purkis's book, The Witch in History. The elements depicted were largely drawn from my friend's description of ritual practices. She also cast the runes and drew them for me as a good luck gift. This tapestry is entitled Sator Arepo Tenet Opera Rotus. The symbols that interest me most are those that at some point in time were drawn on paper or parchment by an actual practitioner, be they witch, alchemist, or traditional healer. In early modern England, there would always be someone somewhere nearby who could cast a protective spell, break a curse, or write a good luck charm, at a price members of the local community could afford when a vet or a doctor was too expensive. The text of the charm might be copied from an original passed down through generations, written in a language the practitioner didn't understand themselves. Often Christian prayer would be intertwined in the spell. The symbols they used came from a range of sources. The words sator, arepo, tenet, opera, rotus came from a magic square, a nonsense palindrome which was found on a wall at Pompeii. Abracadabra appears to have been a very early magical word, which I have seen claimed as being of Greek, Hebrew, Aramaic, or Arabic origin. To me, these magical marks on a more mundane level all represent the human attempt to control events in our lives and our desire to exert power over our world and each other. I had to stick this image in here, as it's one of my favorite artifacts from the Museum of Witchcraft and Magic. It's a different kind of charm for protecting farm buildings. It comes from Ottery St. Mary, about 14 miles from Exeter. It would have been cheaper to install than any contemporary insurance scheme available. I tend to stay away from the dark aspects of witch lore. I read that the numerical symbols in the boxes of the magic square at the bottom left here added up to 666 in all directions, so I left one square blank. It always seems good to treat magical symbols and powers with respect. While adapting this talk for this presentation, I had a terrible time editing the text of this section. There's at least one sentence that got lost and I still haven't found. I was going mad with frustration by the end. Of course, it will have been the vagaries of the text writing app I was using. Or perhaps I hadn't quite been showing due respect. I admit I did spend a quiet moment saying thank you just in case. The framing text on this tapestry lists all the English statutes that designated witchcraft as a felony. Although it was eventually downgraded, it wasn't totally decriminalized until 1951. The last prosecuted woman, the medium Helen Duncan, was convicted and imprisoned in 1944. I return to the theme of modern science as fearful magic for this tapestry entitled Tempestarii, Storm Raisers, Atmospheric Methane, Parts per Billion. It was made in 2016 and reflects upon our fears of imminent climate change. The images include historic woodcuts of witches controlling the weather and the devastation that was thought to result. The knotted rope at the center refers to a magic spell documented on the coast of Cornwall called Selling the Wind. As recently as the 1990s, a becalmed sailor bought a 3-knotted rope from a witch in the village of Boscastle with her instructions. To raise a breeze, he should untie 1 knot, for a wind 2, and for a storm 3. His boat sailed safely out of the harbor soon afterwards, it was said. The red figures top and bottom are scientific data, accurate up to 2015, which indicate the rising rate of climate change. For example, the red figures top left indicate the increase in concentration of methane in Earth's atmosphere between 1950 and 2015. The green images are microscope photos of the fungus disease Phytophthora, whose spread is associated with global warming. I made my own images of the fungus from a glass slide using a microscope camera. The sentence framing the tapestry on the left and top borders is taken from the book on witch hunting written by King James VI of Scotland and First of England, entitled Demonology. The text reads, "They can raise storms and tempests in the air, either upon sea or land." It was taken directly from the book in the display case here. The curator at the Museum of Witchcraft and Magic in Boscastle kindly photographed several pages for my use, from their copy of the book, originally published in 1597. In 2018, this tapestry was awarded the recognition of the Latvian National Museum of Art at the 6th Riga International Textile Triennial in Latvia. I was extremely proud and very surprised. With me here is the curator who presented me with the award. The next tapestry in the Witchcraft series returns to the trial of the 3 Bideford witches from North Devon in 1682. They were the 3 whose execution was commemorated on the plaque in Exeter. It's entitled Grace Thomas and Temperance Lloyd, Why Dost Thou Weep for Me?, which is a quote from the original testimony of Temperance Lloyd, the accused leader of the group. The text, retelling Grace Thomas's account of what Lloyd said to her, is from an original pamphlet of the trial. Thomas testified that as she lay ill in bed, she felt as if pins and awls were being thrust into her body, and as if her flesh were being torn from the bones with a man's fingers and thumbs. She believeth that the said Temperance Lloyd hath been an instrument of doing much hurt and harm unto her body. Later on in the trial, another woman accused Temperance of making a picture or puppet in wax or clay to prick and cause torment to Grace Thomas. Temperance Lloyd confessed to doing all this, assisted by the devil, and to putting a puppet into Grace's bed. I finished the design cartoon for this piece on the day in 2016 when the UK voted by a small majority for Brexit. While I respected the democratic result, I felt desolately sad. Being part of the European Union with the ease of travel and seamless transportation of my artwork across borders was what made the expansion of my career as an artist possible. I will be eternally grateful for it. Images of fear, hostility, and violation of boundaries resonated strongly with me on that day. In retrospect, I perceive the colors as being rather hysterical as well. Grace's tale of the devil in the shape of a magpie beating at her bedroom window seemed appropriate when issues of being threatened by outside forces were so prominent. In 2017, after years of exhibiting individual tapestries, mostly in continental Europe, I put together a touring exhibition of the whole Witchcraft series so far. It was quite a big enterprise. I titled the show Certain Witches, Fear, Myth, and Magic. It's been exhibited twice so far, and the experience has transformed my practice. Exposing the entire series in beautiful gallery spaces has allowed me to see my entire train of thought, from inception through to the most recent work. It's a mundane fact, but I've never had enough room to hang the whole series at once anywhere else. Engaging with audiences who came to see the show, as here at the Museum in the Park in Stroud, has opened new channels, both of inspiration and of research for further work. Alongside the day-to-day tasks of constructing the tapestries, for many years I have read quite a lot of scholarly writing and critical theory as part of my research. I also do a certain amount of writing myself, mostly catalogue essays and occasionally exhibition reviews for journals such as Textile, the Journal of Cloth and Culture. As part of preparing my solo exhibition, I wrote and published a catalogue raisonné with beautiful photos, an introduction by Professor Leslie Miller, and an essay by myself. It lays out the detailed research and background of all the tapestries up to 2017. It also serves to clarify and consolidate my thinking. Entitled Witch, Hex, Sorcière, copies of the book are still available via my website. I hope to continue touring the Certain Witches exhibition once art venues are fully reopened. The show was under consideration for several sites when lockdown came in. I'm hopeful that, as a complete package that's ready to go, it might prove appealing to venues who are starting to get up and running again. I finished this medium-sized piece entitled Once Upon a Time in 2018. It refers both to the poisoned apple given to Snow White by her evil witch stepmother and the trial of another English woman accused of witchcraft named Elizabeth Style in 1664. This apple image of a Cox's orange pippin we grew in our own garden is leading me in a new direction. I've always been quite interested in the 3D modeling of images, as with the hangman's nooses in Certain Witches, my early piece, and the 3-knotted rope in Tempestarii. I was quite pleased with the eggshells in this small piece called For Luck at Sea, which I made for a site-specific group exhibition with the 62 group of textile artists in Grimsby in 2014. Fishermen there believed, I was told, that you should always smash eggshells to prevent witches setting sail in them to raise storms at sea. When I made Grace Thomas and Temperance Lloyd, I needed an image of a wax puppet, and I wanted it to have a more palpable quality than the line drawings around it, to add to a sense of human terror. I wanted it to be an ambiguous figure. So I made a tiny wax figure, and as I often do, photographed it and blew it up to size for the tapestry. It was about 2 or 3 centimeters long, and when I blew it up, I was able to get a lot more of the texture that had arbitrarily turned up in just through using this wax. I completed my latest large tapestry after lockdown began. It's entitled The Witchcrafts of Elizabeth Style of Bayford, Somerset, 1664. It depicts elements from the trial of Elizabeth Style, as recounted by a clergyman named Joseph Glanville in his book Sadducismus Triumphatus. The book is thick with stories of witchy gatherings and supernatural events, largely in the West Country, which he uses to illustrate his arguments for the existence of witches. It was published after his death in 1681. Writing it seems to have been a pastime for him as a gentleman, rather than a deep and fearful cry born of religious terror. My intention was to lay out elements of the story of Elizabeth's style as if they were objects in a gentleman's curiosity cabinet, surrounded with texts taken from his book. Elizabeth Style was accused of poisoning a neighbor's child with a very fair red apple. She supposedly met the devil in the woods regularly with a group of her friends. Among other things, they stuck poppets with thorns after they were baptized by the devil, with the names of their chosen victims. Under interrogation in prison, a large fly supposedly flew out of Elizabeth's head. She died in prison rather than being hanged, as indicated by the lengths of chain. The elements of the stories I'm telling now seem to want a bit more space, which means a greater use of color and 3D effects. In this piece, I redeployed the apple and the wax poppet from previous works. I do this when I feel there might be more to explore in the image. There are likely to be more poppets and now more thorns in the near future. I completed one small piece during the current period of lockdown entitled Protective Magic, Dried Cat, April to May 2020. In England, mummified cats have been found walled up, often beside fireplaces in old houses. They are thought to have been put there to protect the house, either from bad luck or rats and mice. It's believed that they were dead before being interred. I certainly hope so. This image is from a photo of a dried cat found in Gloucestershire. I think my experience of our lockdown predicament may have ended up giving it a bit of extra emotional spin. As these strange times continue, I'm making a series of small pieces, working towards my next big tapestry in the Witchcraft series. It will depict other aspects of the story of Elizabeth Style. One of the great strengths of being an artist, as I observe of myself and others, is that the work continues regardless, even in a suspended state of crisis as at present. In some ways, this body of work is just me doing my life. The ideas continue to engage me and to draw me further on. The fact that I'm the captain of this particular ship means I can extend the series as far as I want to. At a time of such uncertainty, there's great solace in that thought. In terms of the project itself, hopefully it expresses a relationship to history, to narrative, and to primary texts. I know I only scratch the surface and create my own particular layer of myth and folklore. I often get aspects wrong. I know I can't understand the past, but there is something fulfilling about trying to imagine it, to project onto it things that are meaningful in the present and to myself. I know I'm only telling my version, projecting my thoughts and ideas into a series of spaces. My approach is idiosyncratic, sometimes ill-informed, and following my own particular thread, which has many flaws and kinks. Holes in my knowledge and missteps form part of the overall pattern. In the end, after all, what is finally left hanging on the wall just represents a voice telling stories. It's my voice in this world, and maybe that's enough. Thank you.
Some excellent stuff there. Thank you very much, Anne. So I was wondering, Anne, you did mention about the fact that you find out more information sometimes about a subject after completing a piece of work. I wondered if that affected your relationship to the work, or whether you thought at any point that there was a case for redressing something or for visiting something again, and with the new information. And I'm wondering whether that might also relate to the way that you're using some of these motifs again.
Yes, I certainly, what we're really talking about is time. These things are so slow to make, but certainly, yes, I'm always interested in. I think there's something about the kind of malleability of this set of ideas that I'm just fascinated by, that, you know, well, what I was taught, this is where my history degree comes back into it. The one thing I came out of it with was a strong sense that we know nothing whatsoever about the past, except that for which we have evidence. And of course, as evidence improves, history changes, in effect. The history in my mind changes according to what I learn. And that's just seems to be a lifelong process, and one that I celebrate. Yes, I've actually thought as far as maybe someday I might end up, I don't know, could even end up disfiguring the original works and making the corrections. My favorite is there's an academic in Bristol who's very active, named Will, and it's Will Hutton, isn't it? And he corrected me about the tapestry that has the 10 different words for witches on it, because he says, and he's an expert, he's Will Pooley, not Will Hutton, Will Pooley. He says that his in-depth research indicates that almost all the witches prosecuted in France were male. And of course, I have said sorcière, which is the feminine for witches. So that was very interesting. So one day, who knows, I might go back with a can of spray paint and cross out the E. That could happen. I like to think anything can happen with a work of art, really.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Felicity Griffin-Clark had an observation. I wonder if you wanted to share that, Felicity.
Well, I was working in the Premier's department in Victoria at the time, and that came across my desk as part of the Vagrancy Act. They decided they'd decriminalise witchcraft. And I mean, there were lots of active witches around, and as far as I knew, no one had been prosecuted, but it was still lingering in the statute books. And I think it's part of the general social assumption that it is bad. And I was really interested in what you were saying about the women being prosecuted and hanged as a criminal offence rather than as heresy. I think that's fascinating and probably not very well known. It tends to be seen, you know, consorting with the devil equals heresy.
The whole thing, and my knowledge is always tenuous. I don't claim, I'm not an academic historian. So anybody is free to correct me in any assertion I make. But I lost the thread. Witchcraft being prosecuted as being against the law, as ideas about continental witchcraft began to spread into Great Britain with the book, you know, with the rise in publishing, ideas about continental demonology also came in. And there's something very subtle that I haven't quite been able to articulate yet, to do with the fact that these gentlemen were very interested in witchcraft, sometimes magistrates, sometimes just gentlemen, clergymen, people like that, who wanted to study and write about witches and their practices. And more as time went on, the idea of the devil as a major player in witch practice wasn't there from the beginning, I don't think, in early modern English witchcraft. It was very much the things about familiars. Familiars apparently is a very English characteristic in belief about belief about witches, which actually is quite typical when you think of how the English have this reputation for loving animals. So the animal familiar was always there, but the actual devil doing things like the next tapestry. Okay, the last tapestry of the Gentleman's Cabinet of Curiosities is about a book called Sadducismus Triumphatus, which has lots of cases of witch trials in Somerset. And because he was a gentleman of Somerset, the man who wrote it, a clergyman of Somerset. And I'm losing my thread, I'm sorry. Yes, it's very continental. The witch, the devil, the woman, Elizabeth Style, goes to the woods with her friends, obviously a coven, you know, and they feast and they dance and they sing, and the devil baptizes the poppets with a feather and a bottle of greenish oil to and then they stick thorns in them and curse their enemies, curse their victims. And that's very continental. That's very, you know, the idea of the witch. I believe originally in English witch ideas about the evils of witches the idea of a coven, of a group getting together, didn't exist. Again, that was another thing that is probably imported from the continent. So, you know, as I say, my grasp on this is very tenuous, but I'm just sort of fascinated by all these threads. I love your backdrop, by the way. What is that
Oh,
from?
thank you. It's from a medieval manuscript, and it's an eel. And
Oh,
one of the things I love about it is it's wearing a collar. Which way should I go? That way, yeah.
There's something about that. I can't remember what, because actually I'm also realizing I spent an awful lot of time looking at illustrated manuscripts when I was a student. I did sort of specialize in medieval art history, and illustrated manuscripts were so key. And that goes very easily into the images of
absolutely
the little devils. And
it all mixes in together, and it's just the little bit I know from the later, early modern witchcraft stuff. There seems to be an element of almost witch porn about it, the way that gentlemen really got into it and and there's something about the hiddenness of what women do and what women are and how unknowable they are.
Yes.
That comes into
my goodness gracious, what lovely insights. Those are
it's
lovely.
Fascinating. Thank you. This has been brilliant.
Oh, good. I'm loving it too. This is kind of what I mean about public engagement. I just learned such a lot from these interchanges.
So we've got a question from Jane here next up. Thank you, Felicity. How you doing, Jane?
Hi, just unmuting myself. I was interested in what you said at the beginning, really, about the power of witches, because okay, that was against the law, etc., and they were persecuted and killed and turned into victims, but actually they were quite powerful. And I'm really sort of interested in that, and how, because of course in those, if you believe in witchcraft, of course everybody around you is also believing in it. If you are a witch in the community, you're part of that community that believes in witchcraft, presumably. So they come to you and say, will you help me heal my child? And you do something, some spell, and you give them something. If the child lives, you're a great witch.
Quite.
If the child dies, unfortunately, I don't know how that works. If you're a witch, is it do they blame you, or is it the spell they blame? I'm interested in all those questions about how that power worked.
You might be interested in the case of Ursula Kemp, and I know that the very distinguished hero of mine, Professor Marion Gibson of Exeter University, is working on a book on the St. Osoph witches, and I'm really looking forward to seeing it.
Okay.
Because she actually was, as you say, and also often, that woman would also be a midwife and so forth, and certainly be involved. Also, again, if you're interested in reading at all, Diane Purkis's book, The Witch in History, has absolutely wonderful chapters. I think it's called The Witch, the Body, the Child is the chapter I'm thinking of. Wonderful stuff about those kind of very ambiguous relationships. About, one of the things that she points out that witches were thought to do was get too involved with the family. One of the things that might create a sense of fear of a particular woman and make her neighbors feel that she was a dangerous witch was she would take too great an interest in the family, and particularly the children. And you're absolutely right. I believe, if I remember correctly, Ursula Kemp she did do healing magic for the child who got better after she did her spell that involved saying, "Ah, good child, how art thou loaden?" and going in and out of the house 3 times. That's where the handprint came in, because she would take the child by the hand each time, and that child recovered. But I believe it was she fell out with that neighbor, and the next time her neighbor had a new baby, the baby fell out of its crib and died. And that was one of the things that led to Ursula being prosecuted as a witch and hanged eventually. So yeah, you know, these, I guess also because I live in a village, a lot of what's going on in my mind is to do with these kind of intense currents of different kinds of relationships that we all have within village communities and community. And it is brilliant that we actually have got our very own practicing white witch. She makes no bones about it whatsoever. You know, she's just another member of the community, basically. She's great friends with the vicar, which is good. So, yeah, it's just that kind, you know, it's all those strands of thought are so interesting. Yeah, so have I said anything useful?
Yes, yes, you have. The other thing I just wanted to say was I was interested in the witchcraft and the rise of the medical profession.
Oh yeah.
Because the medical profession was and still is dominated by men.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, I know you said that in France there were a lot of male witches.
Apparently, so I'm told. That's what Will Pooley says. He seems to know.
There are around male witches. I'm sure there were. But I just wonder what that's got to do with things. Were witches put down because the medical profession was growing? Because
there's no great evidence for any of this stuff, I need to say, for a start, of course, but there are different schools of thought about what happened, among which are that, of course, you know, the intellectual male seized the power kind of thing and marginalized the female practitioners who were much closer to the community and the body and so forth and so on. There was a lot when people started really looking into the history of witch persecution. Views have changed a lot since those days. There were several early 20th century and mid 20th century authors who came up with very influential ideas, which have now sort of been they seem to have been temporarily at least debunked. I don't know whether they're true or not, but you know, to do with actually an entire pagan religion, you know, a female led pagan religion, that is what was then came to be thought of as witchcraft. That's Margaret, I can't remember her surname, somebody you know much better than I will. You know, what about the
Wiccan religion?
Well, exactly, what about it? You know, that's Gardner, isn't it? That's I believe, yeah. I haven't looked very much at it, but I've certainly got at least one friend who is a Wiccan. Yeah. And my favorite thing that she said, obviously, you know, I respect her. I've never asked in detail about what being a Wiccan involves in terms of ritual and so forth, although I'd love to know. But when I said to her, in a kind of wishy-washy way, I said, well, of course, you know, I'm sure nobody is trying to sort of wield dark powers and do anything horrible to harm anybody. She said, oh no, we want to kick ass. So
yeah, why not?
Well, I'm kind of a believer. If I believe in anything, I'm a believer in that you definitely do get back what you put out. So I'm not messing with any of that stuff. It's too dangerous.
Anyway, thank you.
Cheers. Thank you, Jane. So we've got a really interesting one from Heidi. I don't know if Heidi's able to. There you go.
Oh, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. It was just I was really thinking about because we see so much sort of from the early prints, the engravings and everything, were sort of your source material. It's really negative. It's putting the women down. It's persecution. It's so many things like that. I just wondered sort of how many accounts you came across that had a positive, more enlightening element to them. Just you know, good news stories. I guess it's what survived through the decades, really, hundreds of years.
Well, yeah, I guess that's the thing. Certainly the early modern period, which is the only one I know a little bit about, was the time of the rise of Puritanism and also the English Civil War and Revolution. So it was a time of the overthrowing of old Catholic religion and the incoming of Protestantism and so forth. And there was a lot about, you know, rigorous moral judgment and stuff like that, and that's how I tend to see it, is who knows what stories there were, you know. They're just a huge field of stories there would have been, and the ones that got sort of reinforced and possibly remade and passed on from that era, I think, seem largely to have been, you know, sort of tales of warning, tales of punishment, tales of things, you know, things like that. I'm sure that I'm certain there were. Well, okay, the next tapestry I'm going to make is another take on the trial of Elizabeth Style, but it's going to be her story from the Sadducismus Triumphatus, her testimony, which says that they would go to the woods and feast, and they would have meat and drink and wine and cakes, and then they would dance. So it's going to be, the next one is going to be her testimony, and it sounds pretty nice, actually, especially for a rural group of people who maybe didn't have huge amounts of money and so forth, and the idea that they might have gone to the woods together and just partied. That's what I want the emphasis on that, on that to be. But you know, it's all just stories that are being told. All we've got is written documentary evidence, and only that which has survived, which has got to be, you know, tiny fragments of what actually happened. And it would be lovely, yes, wouldn't it be lovely? And there probably are, you know, the good news stories. I'm just trying to think quickly. I don't know of any, but then of course I've also been looking at it through my own particular periscope as well. So I don't know. I'm sure there are, but I don't know them.
Yeah, it was interesting when you said about the blessings, you know, with the cat mummification at the hearths.
Yes.
That's like well, obviously not great for the cat. Let's assume it passed away from natural causes, obviously.
Exactly.
Yeah, but it's things that sort of improve people's lives rather than take away from them.
Yes.
And I kind of feel like maybe we've already lost some of those kind of elements, and that's sort of a shame for everyone, really.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch you. Froze up for a second there. Could you say what you said?
Oh, sorry,
I've lost those elements. We kind of lost those elements.
I've got bad bandwidth. We maybe have lost some elements of the things like doing blessings for houses, kind of the things that enrich people's lives. We may have lost now through this.
Or not. Yeah. My friend, the White Witch, the ritual she does, she really does do this for local farmers where we live, which is only 10 miles from Exeter. It's not in the middle of nowhere. There are a couple of farming families who get her every year to do a ritual called Crying the Neck, which is blessing the harvest. She goes to the field and does a ritual with them, does a ritual involving the last sheaf. I think she has to cut the last sheaf of wheat. And it's very much a blessing ritual. I know there's certainly loads of white magic practitioners around these days. Obviously, you know, alternative healing is pretty darn close to white magic in many ways. I think there's a whole wide open field of very positive, very blessing things. And what you say, again, this is great, something I hadn't thought of before that you've now given me, is the thing that, of course, the mummified cats, it's a protection of the house, which isn't necessarily a negative thing. It's also a positive thing to have your house, to have a safe space that's protected. So that's really nice. It's thought that it was usually probably done to protect the house against vermin, which is a good idea.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you, Heidi. So we've got Ian's given us a bunch more references to have a look at. Shall I read them out if that's easier?
Oh, goody!
But they're all in the chat, and you're all able to. There's a little
Margaret
button.
Murray, that's her. It's Margaret Murray. Yes.
So yes, Margaret Murray. Professor Roland Hutton has books on Margaret Murray.
Ronald Hutton.
Oh, sorry. Yes. And then there are groups of women cooperating to perform magic, e.g. the Witches of Windsor in 1579, but these groups are different from the Continental trials. And then for animal familiars, look up Dr. Victoria Carr on Twitter. For the demonic on early English witchcraft trials, see Charlotte Rose Miller's book Witchcraft, the Devil and Emotions in Early Modern England, which reevaluates the surviving pamphlets related to English witchcraft accusations. And then, what else did I see? And then Felicity with the lovely eel also refers to Thomas' book, Religion and the Decline of Magic is Good on What Was Lost. So I think that very much relates to what Heidi was saying.
Yes.
Well, the first one was, you know, why are you particularly drawn to that form, that medium of tapestry for what you're doing?
Yeah. I think I've always almost wondered that myself. It's actually something I've been engaged in pretty much since I was a teenager. You know, working with textile media, I certainly I don't know if it's true of much younger women, but women of my sort of age, we always learned textile techniques. It was just one of the things. You learn to knit, or you learn to sew, or you learn to weave, or whatever. And amongst other things, I learned to do this knotting. And so that was, you know, that was just something I knew how to do. And I think when I was at school, it was the late 60s and early 70s. And I think my art teachers were much more interested in self-expression, letting it all hang out, than they were in sitting us down to draw a still life, which I have to say I regret quite profoundly. I think if I had learned to draw and paint well, that is what I would do. But basically, I never did learn to draw and paint well, because I remember asking my teacher, you know, what am I supposed to do? And he said, there's nothing to it but to do it, which is all very well. But I was a 16-year-old. And also, yeah, I guess I was innately originally drawn to words. You know, I really admire people who draw beautifully and paint beautifully. If I could do that, I would. But what I have got is this. And I can seem to do this. And I'm really fascinated in terms of my own process, if you don't mind me sounding a bit egotistical for a second, this business of starting to do 3D modeling, because I'm finding that as long as I've got yarns in my hands, I can do it. I can create. I think I cut it out of my talk because I was afraid it was going to be too long. Of course, it turned out, if anything, to be slightly too short. I spent a half a day doing a cat's eye. And it's approximately 2 centimeters by 2 centimeters. And I put the knots in and they weren't right. And I took them out and I put them in again and they weren't right. And I took them out. And I did that for half a day. And then suddenly there it was. It arrived. And I cannot do that. When I'm confronted with a flat piece of paper, I'm as blank as the piece of paper. But I seem to be able to do it with knots. Don't ask me why. What was your, and you asked about composition.
Yeah, a little bit about composition. Just,
I guess it's because I did go to art college and it was just the best thing I ever did in my life. I was a mature student, and one of the things I did learn about was composition, and I want my compositions to balance. If I don't feel they're balanced, I am not happy. You know, they may be the shapes may be a bit skewed, but I like to think that they do balance. I think if you were to look at them, you might, I hope, think, oh yeah, I see. Yeah, they actually are there's quite a decent sense of balance there. The tapestry, I think, is probably most successful overall is the one with the knotted rope. The sort of tempostarii one.
Yeah.
I think it's to do with the movement. It's quite daring compositionally, because it has got quite a sort of swooping movement from top left to bottom right, and making sure, especially because the elements I'm working with don't entirely show their nature until they are actually on the warp, because the colors work differently, very differently in yarn than they do on paper, which is another reason why I do this. The way color, a lot of tapestry and textile artists will tell you, it's the way color works with yarn that just really makes us addicts. It's just so delicious. The depth, I don't know if you can see, but that behind me on the wall is that tapestry. The lighting in here is really terrible because we've got it dim, because it looks better for for my face. But you know, the depth of color created by the yarns is lovely. And if you're a textile artist, that's what you love. So yeah, that's probably as close as I can get to an answer, really.
And I think you said, I mean, the last bit, but you did mention this was just on the kind of question of what happens when something goes wrong. But I think
Oh,
you said
yes.
kind of I mean, what came to my mind was somebody telling me, listening to something on the radio about Homer's Odyssey, and saying that only a weaver would understand Penelope weaving every night the shroud for Odysseus,
Yes.
and then unweaving it every night. It's only a weaver would understand that unweaving takes as long as weaving. So
Oh,
she must have
yes.
been awake all night long unweaving
Yes.
it.
Oh, yes. But she had so much at stake. If she'd
Yes,
finished
yeah,
weaving it, she would have had to marry one of these guys
yeah,
who kept
yeah,
bothering her.
yeah. Yes.
That's how I've always seen
But
it.
so it just made me think, if something goes wrong, it's obviously like the time the whole thing takes is really important,
It is.
and the time that it. So if you need to undo something, that also takes a lot of time. Yes.
There is. Yeah. Well, textile people think about things in a particular way. I think this is my hypothesis. I think we do think about things in a particular way. There's a point up to which it's not a huge problem. You know, taking out something that maybe took half a day to weave. It's not a massive problem because you know you're going to get the payback of getting there. If you think you're going to get the payback of something like an eye, a face, is my motto is faces have got to be right. It's the thing you will look at if you look at a work of art that's got representational elements in it. You will look at the face, and if the face isn't right, then you might as well forget the whole year's work of the tapestry. So the eye has to be right, the face has to be right. After that, you've got a lot more latitude, because it's amazing what our minds will tell us we're actually seeing. So up to sort of half a day, especially with my technique, I can just cut between the warps, and I have to waste the yarn, which is a shame. Taking it out isn't too bad. Putting it back in is. But after about half a day, that's just too much investment. And then what you have to do is work with it the way it is, which is interesting. It's like, I think of it as being like sculpting stone, actually. Once you have taken that chunk out, you have to work with it the way it is. You can't put it back in. So it's, really, I think that's the most similar thing.
Yeah. Thank you. Really interesting. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kate. So I was going to ask something that was related to what Kate was saying, which was about the scope for change between the composition and in the doing of, and whether there was any flexibility, or whether you ever exercised any flexibility in that.
Yes, I do. The ultimate priority is the composition. I bet you understand about this, because you use a lot of collage. You do a lot of collage in your work. I wouldn't be surprised if balance is important to you as well, and especially as sort of again, I wouldn't be surprised from what I've seen of your work, a sort of precarious balance that that almost isn't there, but it is, and that's when the work's really satisfying to me. Anyway, is when you know, it looks as if it's not actually balanced, but it is. And so it does satisfy that need that we've got, I think, for that, or I certainly seem to have it. In terms of change, yes, I can change the cartoon, because it's just sellotaped. It's elements that are sellotaped onto a painted surface. And sometimes I do. It also has the possibility, because it's big, of slipping. And sometimes it can slip, because I have to keep moving it up every few weeks. It needs to be moved up, and then I check all the elements. Are they still exactly where they're supposed to be? And sometimes they're not, which will affect the composition. So I'm not going to undo it. I have to work with it. Either means I can make the balance happen somewhere else, or it's actually okay even though it's slipped, or sometimes I take elements, I remove elements or change elements. There was originally, if you remember the piece that had the two nooses on it, the Certain Witches piece, which is kind of the signature piece for the exhibition, it originally had text at the bottom. And I was just doing my early witch research, and I suddenly discovered that the text didn't relate to the same witch trials as all the imagery did. And so, being a purist at the time, I took the text out and had to put a couple of images of familiars in instead, and then had to balance them up, even though it's already in progress. But isn't that part of the fun, you know, getting it to work? There is one phantom tapestry, and if I ever have such a huge venue that I really need another big tapestry, I will pull it out. It took a year to make. and it didn't work. So in my storeroom, there is a tapestry that didn't work. And maybe that's actually quite a fruitful thing, to have something that you've invested all that in. And then you look at it you keep looking at it and thinking, well, I think it's going to be all right. Is it going to be all right? It's always all right. In the end, it'll be fine. And then you look at it, hang it up and look at it and think, it didn't work. And I submitted it for 1 or 2 exhibitions and it was turned down, which confirmed my suspicion that it hadn't worked. And now it's in the store cupboard. And I may alter it someday, or I do think about I have actually done some defiling, because these things, especially in textile world, you can get terrifically precious about these things. I am not actually a precious textile maker. There are people who are 100 times more precious than I am. And people working with fine stitching on white, fine fabric, the very idea, I can't eat without spilling food down my t-shirt. So I could not do that, but I can do this. And I made a series of small pieces that I then drove very nasty, big, sharp, actually quite dangerous nails through. And that was quite fun. I quite enjoyed that, but they were only small pieces. I might do something like that with this big piece, or I might decide it's okay, or it might never be seen again.
It's interesting you should say that, because so I remember having a conversation with another artist about her relationship with her work, and that she is aware of when the work is finished because it becomes something else. It's no longer the thing she's working on. It exists in its own right in the world, and she can have a relationship with it. And she refers to it as the laughter moment. She said every time this happens, she laughs. She cannot help it just coming out of her mouth. But this is a joyous moment that she's there with a new friend, as it were. This creating a piece of artwork. And so I think there's that. So there's that. And so you referred to my own practice, and in collage there is that thing that if it's not right, that it doesn't go out. And that the beauty is that you can revisit at some point. But I'm wondering whether what recourse you have for intervention. So one of the things I was going to refer to is somebody, a friend who's an artist who received some work from a relative who died. I think it was cross-stitch and tapestry. No, I think it was just cross-stitch. She's not a cross-stitch artist, and some of this work wasn't finished. So what she did is she cut the pieces up and made a new Franken piece. So I wonder if there's scope for this, or whether there's scope for another sort of intervention that you could have on that large piece that would bring it along.
Wouldn't it be fun? Wouldn't it be fun to have some kind of group of artists who all had something? I mean, for it to really work for me, it would have to have the level of investment that mine did. It would have to be a big piece of work that had sort of broken your heart by not working after a year. And if we could all sort of, like Secret Santa or something, just have to take, draw lottery tickets or something and be given one of these other pieces of work, and then come back together with whatever you ended up doing with it. And maybe even that would involve ideas about how it made us feel, because if somebody else actually violated my imperfect piece of work, that might suddenly awaken a love for it in me when it was too late to do anything about it, or something like that. I've been watching too much TV during lockdown. You know what I mean? I think anything is possible. I think that's one of the great things about being an artist. It's kind of what I said. It's such a cliche, but it's true when I said, I am the captain of this ship. This is mine. I can do whatever I want with this. And I really like that.
Yeah. We've got a question from Jane, and then we've got one from Felicity after that as well.
Okay, yeah, no, I just wanted to say that I really like the 3D things that you put in, the doll, especially the doll.
Oh, good. The doll is making a big comeback in the next piece.
Yeah, I love the doll. I think she I think she is beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
And the big tapestry, maybe you can add 3D to it, as you're doing 3D now.
It's possible. There are technical. It would not be the kind of tapestry it is if I did that, because I would have to make another sort of layer on top of it. But that could happen. you know.
Yeah.
I put
And the
more
other
in my-
thing I was thinking for this big tapestry, maybe the big tapestry could be burned.
Yes, exactly. I
would be
would
it.
love to burn. I have thought of that. I would love to do it. My one thing, I think I would have to sort of document it with film or something, because
Yeah.
my God,
Oh
it
yeah,
would smell.
definitely
Can you
film.
imagine the smell? That's what I thought. And trying to show it, it would
Maybe you can
smell.
dance round it
Exactly.
in the woods with some
idea.
friends.
I did have a kind of magical moment when it was quite funny, although it was awful at the time, when I trying to edit the text about the text. And just chunks of it, I swear, kept disappearing. And when I was reading it just now, I thought, there was another bit there before. There was another bit. And I was reading it out and thinking, I know there was another bit there before. Thinking, oh God, you know, it's not finished. Even though I sat very quietly with it just for a moment and just said, thank you. You know, I give respect to any forces who are kind of active on this at the moment, just in case, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, I like the idea of dancing around it, burning it and dancing around it. That would be good. One of the reasons I got involved in tapestry in particular is the opportunities to make large scale work. There is something about a large scale, particularly tapestry, some other kinds of textile work often. There's just something, it's a bit like, I don't know if you like Rothko, I like Rothko.
Yes.
And there's something about the way you just become absorbed
Yeah.
in that. If you're standing in front of a Rothko, I know he did them as a sort of meditation, I believe he did. And it just, that quality, and big textiles, big tapestries have that quality. My tapestries are not that big. The kind of people I've been showing with in Europe, and some of the people I know in this country and in Scotland, you know, they make big tapestries, and there's just something about it. It gives it an additional quality, a sort of monumental
Yeah.
quality
Yeah.
that I find very
They
exciting.
sort of they envelop you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they do.
Yeah.
They can. It's a lovely feeling. I love it.
Thank you.
I can witter on forever.
I was just thinking, as you're talking, I keep thinking, my first question was whether you use other elements or mixed media in your work. When you were talking about destroying those small pieces using large nails, I thought that would look amazing to have big spikes.
Yeah.
And I wondered if, and this might sound a bit weird, but hopefully we're okay with weird in this company, is if you had asked your rejected, not quite right piece what it wanted to be.
Yeah, I could do that. That's a good idea. I'll do that.
Sometimes I use Reiki on my work when it's not working.
Oh, wow.
And
That's
that can sort of, it's not a pun, sorry, my dog's jumping up on me. It's not a pun, but it unknots something, you know? It's like there's a kink in the creative process. And if you, A, let it go, B, ask it what it wants, and C, help it along with something like Reiki or positive energy that can just move you along.
Yeah. I kind of feel as though I've sort of moved along. It might have actually been something about letting go. Something about doing that level of effort and hope and self-belief and having it not be okay. Letting it go. That was actually kind of around that region, around that area that you're talking about. You know, that I'm just thinking that again for the first time. It might make a comeback or it might not.
It may have served its purpose.
It may have served its purpose, you know.
The only other thing I just wanted to quickly say was when you're talking about large scale works and the impact they have. I live in Rome, and earlier this year, before lockdown, they put Raphael's tapestries back in the Sistine Chapel, and I just snuck in before lockdown, and it transformed the whole space.
I bet.
And you think the Sistine Chapel, as you know, most people you usually see it, is incredible. They put the Raphaels in, and because so much of the weft is gold thread, it glowed. The whole chapel was full of light. It was just incredible. It was magic. So,
magical.
yeah, seeing things in real life.
I don't think I knew that the tapestry still existed. They've got the cartoons are in the V&A.
Yeah, yeah.
And
they've got the tapestries in the Vatican museums. There you can see them, but putting them back in the chapel where they were designed when they were supposed to be was
How divine. Literally.
magical. Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. How lovely. Live in Rome. Oh,
Thank you very much. It was beautiful.
thank you very much.
Yeah.
It's been,
Thank you. That was really wonderful.
oh, it's been great.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Anne.
Great
Thank you,
pleasure.
Stuart. Thank you, Anne. Thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thank you,
Oh, thank you.
everybody. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Bye.
See you.